Hello and welcome. This is Jim Karp with Raymond, and I've got Don McNally with me. Don, how are you today?
Doing fantastic, Jim. Hope you're doing well, too.
Yeah, actually, everybody's staying home, so it's a good thing. I think this flattening the curve is definitely a good idea. But from a medical practice perspective, you're hearing a lot from your clients. Can you share some of the stuff that's going on out in the medical industry at this point?
Yeah, sure, Jim. I've had a great opportunity over the last week to talk with so many different physician and medical practices, really throughout our firm and really covering practices in many different parts of the country. And there's a common theme as to what we're seeing within these practices. First off, right now, the practices are struggling. This is really, uncharted territory, not just for medical practices, but really all other businesses around the country. They really don't know which way to turn. In many instances, elective cases have really been canceled. No hospitals, no ambulatory surgery centers are taking elective cases. So the volume within these practices is way down. In other instances, patients are just afraid to come into the office right now. With the COVID-19 virus, it's got people really scared. And they're particularly scared to go into a physician's office thinking that the virus could be in those offices right now. Also, they're concerned with their staff. In many instances, sometimes their staff is concerned to come to work, and they're concerned about the welfare of their staff. There's a lot of unknowns out there regarding the virus, and how to make sure that they're best taking care of their employees is important too. Some practices have laid their staffs off, and they're looking at unemployment compensation, which in some instances is more lucrative than what they were paying their staff. So they're concerned about how they're going to get their staffs back off of unemployment. So, Jim, they're nervous about their future. They're really looking for direction. They're looking for answers. They're looking for someone to help them lead them through this time and help their businesses not just survive, but look to thrive in the future.
Okay, so with that as the backdrop, what would you suggest based on your experience?
Hey, Jim, I really think it's getting down to the fundamentals. It's what's really important for a business right now. I think that they have to take a look at what their cash flow is right now. Unfortunately, many practices that we work with don't focus on this as much as they really should. This is the time to do it right now. You need to be taking a look at doing what's called a 13-week cash analysis. Jim, that's really a 3-month analysis right now. You need to get a handle on what your revenues are going to be and what your expenses are going to be. You need to make sure that when we get out of this thing, that you're ready to prime the pump and you're ready to get your practice going again. So monitoring your cash flow over these next several weeks to months is going to be key and paramount to importance for these practices to thrive coming out of this thing.
And then talking about revenues too, I know that there's a whole bunch of legislation that's come out, and there's, for example, like the PPP loan. What are your thoughts on that, and can it benefit the medical practices?
Jim, there's a lot in the legislation within the CARES Act that can really impact a physician's practice, but they really have to know how to handle this and what to do with it. A couple things that have come out just today, in fact, many of the practices we work with started to receive what's known as the CARES Relief Fund payment. Okay. So, it was a surprise to many practitioners when they looked at their bank account this morning. They saw a deposit from HHS, from Medicare, of an unknown amount that they received. There was a $30 billion fund allocated under the CARES Act to provide money to providers, not just hospitals, but on down to providers, including physicians, physical therapists, DME practices too. Now, there's some strings attached to this money, Jim. We're just finding out more and more about it today. So I'm going to be sending out some literature to clients soon, but you're going to find out that there's some strings attached to these monies. But nonetheless, there is some money that's getting into some practices' accounts right now that's going to help them through the next few weeks. Other things, Jim, that we've been working with is, you mentioned it a minute ago, the PPP Loan, the Payroll Protection Program, okay? We've just seen a tremendous amount of interest amongst our client base in applying for this loan. And, it's a really good thing that they are applying for it. But, like many things in this world, what really starts off as simple often becomes more complex. The PPP loan just came out. It came out a week ago, or it was approved by the federal government when they did the CARES Act. Okay, many of our clients right now have gotten their applications in for this. Jim, we've noticed that some banks are a little bit more ready than other banks to help get these applications rolling. But Jim, they're literally receiving thousands, if not tens of thousands of applications right now under the CARES Act. There's a lot of concern out there amongst the medical practice community is what's going to happen if these funds dry up. You probably heard that Congress is taking a look at a CARES Act number 4 or stimulus package number 4.
Yeah.
We're going to have to see what happens with that right now. What we're advising to clients is to get their application in right now. There's a lot of questions regarding what do I spend this money on. I think that's question number 2. The first question needs to be how do I get this application in? How do I get it approved? And how do I begin to receive the money? I think we'll be concerned about how you're going to spend that money in the future.
And I think there's a difference, and I'm not the expert on this, but the PPP loan is to cover certain expenses and it can be forgivable. But then the other loans are just a loan for now, and then there is some strings attached to pay it back. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right, Jim. The PPP loan is one that can, as long as it's used for the eligible purposes, and it's meant to be used for payroll. That includes just your traditional payroll, as you might think of it, health insurance and retirement plan costs, but it can also be used to cover rent and utility costs. It's meant to be used over the first 8 weeks after the money is received and the medical practice is opened back up. Then those monies are meant to kind of act as working capital to seed the practice going forward and help get it running again. There's some other packages out there. Some clients have asked questions about the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, the EIDL loan right there. We're not really advocating clients seek any monies under this section of the act right here. Really, Jim, you can't take those dollars if you're getting the PPP dollars. Okay. You can't get them both. What's going to happen is your PPP dollars will be reduced should you receive the Economic Injury Disaster Loan. And to be quite honest with you, I don't really think that a lot of our clients are going to fall into the parameters wherein they will qualify for the EIDL. But many clients have still applied for it nonetheless, just to see if they're going to get it. Going back to the PPP loan, Jim, I want to make sure that I state this. If the money is used for the eligible and intended purposes, then the promise right now, note I said promise, Jim, we'll see how this stuff all comes through when we get to the summer, is that these monies will be forgiven. These loans will be forgiven. If you don't use all of the money, it's really not a bad deal, Jim. You've got several years to pay for it at a pretty nominal interest rate. Okay. It's a pretty good deal to help these practices get going there. Jim, there's some other things too that I'd like to talk about here that we're seeing some of our practices take advantage of, and maybe some of the people who are listening in may have heard of this. There's the Medicare Accelerated Advance Payment Program. Okay, this is something that's been offered to medical practices, basically been available to hospitals for the longest time. Really, it's a cash flow gimmick. It allows practices now to get money in sooner so that they can kind of bridge themselves during this time. Typically, what we're seeing right now, we've only had, I wouldn't say a handful, a little bit more than a handful, but not a significant portion of our client base take advantage of this. But the HHS, the secretary, has indicated that applying for this process is really going to be accelerated. We're seeing applicants be approved within 4 to 7 days, when it used to take 3 to 4 weeks to get this approved. Okay. Right now, the HHS has reported that they've had 25,000 requests. 17,000 of these requesters have been approved, and they've had $34 billion approved so far under this act. So it's been a way to get some money into practitioners' hands to help them from a cash flow perspective.
So as far as practitioners then, can you define what those practitioners are? Are there any requirements for that? Is it hospitals?
Sure. I think that they've really kept this thing open in terms of defining what a practitioner is, who's available to get this money. It's really hospitals, physicians, medical practices. Some non-physician providers are also eligible. Your physical therapy practices, mid-level providers out there who may have some practices, and durable medical equipment are also eligible to access some of this money. But Jim, you know what? There's some strings to these monies here, and I think that people need to be aware of what kind of things can happen to them. In order to be eligible, you must have billed Medicare within the last 180 days. I don't really see that as too big of an issue. You can't be in bankruptcy. I don't think you'd be in practice and still be in bankruptcy, but I guess they're trying to root out fraud from right there. You can't be involved in a medical integrity program, and you can't have any outstanding and delinquent Medicare overpayments. Jim, this one is really something that I think practitioners have to take a look at. It's not uncommon for physicians to carry credit balances in their accounts receivable overpayments, and perhaps maybe they haven't refunded those overpayments back to the payers. This is something that I think practitioners are going to have to take a pretty close look at in monitoring their accounts receivable. There's also some repayment terms that I think people need to be aware of, because really this is just a loan. It's an advance payment on future Medicare claims, okay? So you get the money today, you're going to provide the services to eligible Medicare recipients in the future, and then the payments that you would otherwise receive for those services are going to be recouped by Medicare, okay? So you're receiving the money today for services you're going to provide in the future, okay? And that recoupment period is going to basically start 120 days after receipt. So that's 4 months from now. So that's going to take us right now out 4 months. It's going to take us into the August timeframe is probably when practitioners are going to have to start handling this. A concern that we have is how we're going to handle this from a business office perspective. This is not going to be business as usual in the billing area, and how it's going to be handled there and how cash flow is going to be monitored is going to be key here. The level of financial sophistication that it's going to take to monitor this is going to be kind of ramped up a little bit for the practitioners who accept this type of money.
Okay. Well, so, kind of putting a summary on this then is you've got the PPP, the payroll one, right? You've got the CARES Act that you talked about here today that's out there, as well as this Medicare accelerated advance payments. And it kind of reminds me of Popeye. I remember the gentleman that always wanted the hamburger in advance. He'd say, "I'd gladly pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today." So it sounds like you can get your funds now and then deliver the services later. And
yeah, if Wimpy were eligible to get one, perhaps he'd want a loan too.
Absolutely. So it's all based on cash now, and it kind of goes back to where you were at the beginning, is managing that cash flow to understand it. And then secondly, here's the different sources that you got. So if people have further questions, what's the best way to reach you?
Hey, Jim, liquidity is the name of the game. And if people do have further questions, I'd encourage them to reach out to their Raymond advisor, or they can reach me, Don McAnally, at 989-751-4065. This is a real difficult and challenging time for everyone. Everyone needs someone who they can rely upon to help them achieve success. And Jim, I thoroughly believe that how we manage our businesses, our practices through this situation right here with the COVID is really going to spell success for us over the next 10 years. Those people that manage this situation in the correct way are going to be the ones that will thrive into the future.
Well, Don, I know they're in good hands with you. So thank you for your time, and we'll talk with you soon.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate it.